Today, far-right Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and scandal-prone Matt Gaetz of Florida proved so toxic they're running out of places to hold political rallies. New reporting from the Daily Beast highlights their desperate attempt to find venues that welcome their America First rhetoric. Just last night, they were forced to hold a rally on a street corner in Riverside, California, after 3 venues backed out. So this MAGA-touting pair forced to fundraise on a street corner. Apparently, Four Seasons Total Landscaping, made famous by Rudy Giuliani, not available. But whether on street or on stage, people still showed up to see the two in California, including some of Trump's wildest supporters who ultimately clashed with counter-protesters, as this newly obtained video shows. You can say they are fringe, or maybe it is time to take Republicans at their word, that loyalty to Trump and Trumpism remains who they are. Here's how Senator Lindsey Graham puts it.
Here's what I can tell you about President Trump. He's heartbroken as to what's going on in our country and the world at large. He thinks he can fix it, and he told me he has unfinished business. So I will be shocked if he doesn't run for president in 2024. This is the party of Donald Trump. If you think otherwise, you're in for a rude awakening.
Party of Donald Trump. Yes, Lindsey Graham, who seemed to write off his friendship with Trump after the insurrection, now says Trump is the one to, quote, fix our country. No care for all the destruction Trump's caused. This doubling down on defining the party by loyalty to Trump comes as we learn even more about January 6th. 3 new bombshell books set for release this summer detail Trump's dangerous temperament in the final chapter of his presidency. Michael Bender, the author of the new book, Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost, described those final months today here on MSNBC.
We all know the story of chaos of 4 years in the Trump presidency. You don't have to be a Wall Street Journal reporter working over there every day to know that. But what was striking in the reporting of this book was how many people very close to Trump in the White House and at the campaign had become concerned he was dangerous for the country. I mean, Alex, he asked his own teammates in the White House to have Americans shot.
Right.
He wanted people protesting civil rights abuses to be shot, to have their skulls cracked. His own Secretary of State was concerned that he might lean into a foreign conflict in order to hold on to power.
So this is where we find ourselves, with one of our 2 major political parties orbiting around a twice-impeached, one-term president whose most loyal followers are now standing on sidewalks shouting about vaccine hesitancy as coronavirus cases surge thanks to the Delta variant, and as those unvaccinated account for nearly all hospitalizations and death. Kicking us off this hour, Hayes Brown, writer and editor for MSNBC Daily, former HUD secretary and former 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro is now an MSNBC political contributor, and former U.S. Attorney Harry Litman. He is also a legal affairs columnist for the LA Times. It is good to see you both, Harry. I'm going to start with the new information we're learning about Trump's response to the insurrection in these new books. What sticks out to you, and does any of the new reporting expose the former president to even more criminal liability?
Well, it seems to me, Alicia, that the most sensational stuff portrays him as completely unhinged, isolated, as unpresidential and dangerous and toxic as can be. But for criminal liability, remember, there's a crime out there. We know about it. And what has to happen for Trump to have liability is for him to be connected with it as a conspirator or even a mastermind. So at least the excerpts we've gotten so far from these 3 terrific books tend to portray him more as a madman and less as a criminal. I'd want them all carefully with a prosecutor's eye, but the real highlights to date are more about a complete crazed president and less about an actor.
Right, which I think a lot of us felt we already had a pretty full picture of. I mean, Hayes, you write this week about your frustration with these political tell-all books. People are speaking out now about the dangers of Trump's final months in office. How critical would it have been if we had known some of this information, let's say 6 months ago?
I think extremely critical. I mean, if any of the people who are cited as sources in some of these books, like, for example, Vice President Mike Pence's National Security Advisor, Keith Kellogg, is quoted in one of the excerpts that came out recently from I Alone Can Fix It, the book that's coming out from Washington Post reporters, that he, on January 6th, the day of the insurrection, was in with the president, trying to convince him to please send out a tweet or something to get the mob to be called off, and the president just wouldn't listen, would not do it. If he had come forward with his, testimony, his belief that Trump just would not call off the mob during the period where the Senate was holding their impeachment trial, I do wonder whether things would have turned out a little differently in that second impeachment trial, where we did see more Republicans vote to convict Donald Trump and prevent him from running in 2024, as he seems to be gearing up to do. So we could have nip this in the bud, this whole idea that Trump could come back to power, if some people had come forward with what they know instead of waiting to tell reporters to go into these fantastic books. I mean, I hold so much scorn for these sources for these books. The reporters, not so much. It's not like they are the actual the people who are in the room, like John Bolton during the first impeachment trial, who refused to testify, but then almost a year later would publish his book verifying everything that Trump was charged with in that first impeachment trial. We could have had this completely done if the Senate had been able to convict him during impeachment, during either of those trials, but they couldn't, or rather the Republicans couldn't be forced to in the Senate because people didn't come forward with what they knew in time.
Secretary Castro, part of the reason that we are talking about this is because what happened 6 months ago, 9 months ago, you can draw a direct line from those moments and the choices that were made to the conversations we are having today about things like voting rights. You have been pushing hard for Senator Manchin to move on the filibuster. Senator Amy Klobuchar spoke to CNN this morning about her effort to get him on board. I want you to take a listen.
Number one would be to get Republicans. I personally don't think that's going to happen. So the second thing is to say, well, Senator Manchin has indicated some interest in the standing filibuster. That is one way to do it. We could have it focused on voting rights only. So we're continuing to work with him and many others to get this done.
So first, I wonder, Secretary Castro, if you agree with the senator's analysis there and if you are actually hopeful that he could move on this issue.
Well, of course, I'm hopeful, like everybody else is, that he will, and we have a lot of Texas Democrats up there right now, legislators who are pushing for voting rights legislation, and so many other people, including Senator Manchin's colleagues. We do need to set aside the filibuster or do a carve out, something that will allow voting rights legislation to get passed. And you can draw that straight line, as you mentioned, Alicia, because this all started with the big lie, Trump's lie about massive voter fraud in the 2020 election. The pinnacle of that was on January 6th. We saw the disastrous consequences of that. And then we saw more consequences in the spring as state legislature after state legislature that is Republican controlled passed legislation to suppress voting rights in my home state of Texas, in Georgia, and so many other states around the country. Democrats are going to have to grapple with that. America is going to have to grapple with that. The best way to do that, I believe, is to pass voting rights legislation, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We're going to have to get around the filibuster, very likely to do it. And for Senator Manchin or anybody else to think that we're not, I see that as naive. I don't see these Republicans who have bought in completely to Trump's big lie. I don't see them suddenly saying, yes, there are 10 of us that are going to agree to voting rights legislation. That's just not going to happen.